truth is that once you are convicted of a crime, your family who wants to engage with you does not have your income. Typically, inmates in prison make about 19 cents an hour. Commissary is very expensive. If your loved ones send you money, there is a tax just for them to be able to do that. And of course, things in commissary cost as much, if not more, than things in the retail market outside of prison. Obviously, inmates have difficulties in every aspect of life, but it leads overall to a renter community that cannot build equity in housing. It leads to a community that can only get the most menial employment. And this has impacts for children, and meaning that children grow up with lower family income when you have a community that is targeted for mass incarceration. And the economics are really just devastating.
I want to switch gears here. Policing, accountable policing to be exact, was at the height of the Derek Chauvin case, who you prosecuted for the murder of George Floyd. And you had this to say after the verdict. Take a quick look at this.
I would not call today's verdict justice, however, because justice implies true restoration. But it is accountability, which is the first step towards justice. And now the cause of justice is in your hands.
If accountability is the first step towards justice, what's the next step?
Well, the next step would have been to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Congress has not seen fit to do that. I mean, the truth is, Renita, people have said to me, well, look, you convicted the guy. What's the problem? Didn't that show the system worked? Absolutely not. Normally, the district attorney prosecutes these cases, not the attorney general. Normally, we don't have private lawyers who come in to assist in the prosecution. You just go with the regular group. Normally, it's the police departments that do the investigation in crime. This time, it was the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. There are a lot of things about the Chauvin case that were different from the norm. But the bottom line is we need systemic change. We need change that will make meaningful differences in the lives of people. Just imagine the 9-year-old child that watched George Floyd get murdered at the hands of Derek Chauvin. What is she going to think, not at 9, but at 29? Maybe she'll be a mother herself. What is she going to teach her children? What will her prospects for her life be if the people whose job it is to protect her and serve her, she is fearful of because of what she witnessed through her own eyes? This is generational trauma, which has economic effects in real life. So as we talk about, racism, segregation, we're not just talking about prejudiced private individuals. We're talking about federal government complicity. We're talking about terrorism, as occurred in Wilmington, Tulsa, Rosewood, and many other occasions. And so this is what we've got to begin to really face if we want to go past accountability into the territory of real justice.
Brilliantly stated, brilliantly stated. And so you mentioned the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, so I really need to stick there for a quick moment. It was approved by the Democratic-led House in March. It has yet to receive a vote in the Senate, as we know. We know about 10 Republicans would be needed for it to pass because of that chamber's filibuster rule, of course. But we haven't really heard much from President Biden on it in a bit, and he was a huge supporter of it right at the top. So, what's your outlook on where it stands right now?
Well, you can't do the work I do unless you are just a tireless optimist, right? So I believe we're going to get it passed. But I also believe that we clearly hit some roadblocks. We're going to repeat this ugly pattern if we don't make some real meaningful changes. And I just want to assure everybody listening to your show, if we say liberty and justice for all, including the descendants of American slaves, liberty and justice for all, it will be better. It won't be worse.
How have police fund flows been going in light of this? Have they gravitated toward or away from the community in which the George Floyd atrocity happened?
Well, by and large, things are as they were before. I mean, there have been some changes. I think it's good that some communities have invested more in joint response with mental health professionals. We learned here in Minnesota through some of the investigation and work we've done that about half the deadly force encounters with the police involve people in a mental health crisis. So we're now seeing more jurisdictions have joint responses. That's a good thing. We're seeing people try to respond to pretext stops. That's a good thing too. And we're seeing more training. And most importantly, perhaps, we're seeing police leadership like that of Chief Arredondo in Minneapolis really take the bull by the horns and say, you know what, we're not going to be dragged into reform. We're going to lead it. And I think police leadership like his is indispensable to the moment. But look, I think we need to have some sympathy for the position of the average officer. Mm-hmm. The average officer is not a housing expert. The average officer is not a mental health expert. The average officer is trained to protect people with the use of force. They have a gun for a reason, nightstick for a reason. And yet every social ill that our society refuses to take care of, they're asked to go address.
And lastly, Keith, thank you for letting me call you Keith. If you could tell us what brief police model is working that people can look up and research later.
Well, you know what, Renita, I'm so glad you asked about some police models that are showing promise. Now, I want to be clear. There are a lot of if I'm going to mention Newark and I'm going to mention Camden, New Jersey, but there are people who live in both Newark and Camden who will say, well, it's not perfect, so we don't want to say they're perfect, but they show a lot of promise. There has been a dramatic reduction in police shootings and killings in Newark, New Jersey, and in Camden, New Jersey. These are proof that we can make progress. Now, again, there are people who say, well, there's too much camera surveillance, and we're going to debate these issues endlessly, but it's not the case that we are just doomed to bad police-community relationships. You can make progress if you have the political will, the police leadership, community support to do it. And so I would offer those two examples as places where things are being done right.